Welcome to Data in Orbit, the Constellation podcast. I am Oxana, and alongside me is my co-host Kursat. In each episode, we talk to data leaders who are transforming industries by building data-driven organizations. Let's launch. Welcome to another episode of Data in Orbit, the Constellation podcast. Today, we're exploring data governance, an essential component of effective data management. We will unpack what it really is, who should be leading the effort, and why it's essential for every data-driven organization. Joining us today is William Shepard, a seasoned expert in data governance and currently Senior Manager of Data Governance at FanDuel. Will brings years of hands-on experience and insights, which he will be sharing from his own perspective, so his thoughts today reflect his personal journey, not his employer's. And I also have Kursat here with me.
Yeah, this is our first time having a host here together. Thank you very much, Will, today joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So to get started, can you tell us a little bit about you? What have you been up to, and what's your relation with data governance?
Sure. Happy to. So I've been in the data space and the analytics space, big data, small data, tremendously huge data, probably for the majority of my career. Let's call it 15 years. Specifically focusing on the data governance space, that's been a little bit over 5 years, where I've really concentrated on the best practices of data governance, the efforts that interplay between the other apparatuses of a business, right? Prior to really concentrating on the data governance space, I realized after doing data governance officially as a full-time job that I had been doing a lot of that type of work, process improvement, efficiencies, and also like how to begin to think about being coordinated or aligned in our measurement apparatus for several years before that as an analyst, and specifically as a cross-functional analyst trying to improve our reporting apparatus for the business, in this case in an interactive media space, in the video game space.
So let me start with that then. Considering with your experience, like 15 years and majority of it, any aspect of the data, and you are coming from data governance, can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of data governance? You have a hands-on experience and you must have seen what was the approach in the beginning, what happened, how did it change, your observations.
Yeah, and I think this is I appreciate that question, because I think a lot of folks, when they hear data governance, they think one thing in particular, and it's like regulatory compliance. How do we make sure that we're not going to get caught doing something we weren't supposed to be doing? Or how do we keep ourselves safe, mitigate risk, that sort of thing? And without getting into the risk component of things, because I think that's a really loaded word, talking about the compliance side of things, that's really the litmus of, or to simplify that even further, that's really the focal point that drove the evolution of data governance from a branch of a legal team to something that is absolutely focused on data as an asset and how to actually maximize the utility while reducing the toxicity of that asset to the business operations. So speaking functionally, data governance really started years ago, really around how do we keep the business from falling victim to or behaving in a way that was not within the guidelines of the laws that exist today or the laws that are coming down the pipe in the not too distant future. So how do we prepare ourselves? How do we make sure that this company is doing a good job? But that's where the data governance started. And more recently, that's evolved, I think, because you have a lot more organizations, a lot more giant companies, and also a lot more just smaller companies realizing that data can be a tremendous value add to the organization and should be part of a decision-making apparatus for a company. And in order to do that correctly and safely and mitigate risk, and unpacking the word risk, I think, is an important topic when we're talking about data governance. But that became a different thing, and it wasn't just about we have to be sure that we're safely managing the privacy of the customers that we're interacting with, or creating the right security protocols and checks and balances to avoid any misperformance or any even the appearance of impropriety related to like our financial numbers and that sort of thing.
And so it sounds like essentially the importance arised with maybe the enforcement of these privacy laws like GDPR, CCPA, and whatnot. But I guess to take a step back, let's define what is data governance, because I think then if we're talking, it's not just about compliance, then what else is it? Like, how would you define it?
Yeah, so another great question. So in the same way that to unpack actually a response to something you said, it wasn't just laws. It wasn't just trying to keep us, the privacy wasn't just the primary motivator. Probably my favorite example of this is Boeing Airlines, right? When you're building an aircraft, it is critical that your apparatus to construct the aircraft is with you're mitigating as much risk as possible in the manufacturing process. In order to do that right, you need to have a whole bunch of controls in place, a tremendous amount of observability in your entire pipeline to every little piece of that aircraft, down to the rivets for the aluminum, the quality of the aluminum, all of that stuff. That is actually data governance. And that's something that they incorporated in the 40s in their manufacturing process at the latest, right? And so to specifically answer your question, what is data governance? I think it is, for all intents and purposes, it is the deliberate, thoughtful approach to progressive maturity of your data. I'm air quoting data here. Like whatever it is that's driving your business. In Boeing, it was manufacturing airplanes at the time that I'm talking about. How do we do that so that the failure rate of our device is exceptionally rare? And when it fails in a safe format. And in order to get to, like, they follow a Six Sigma manufacturing paradigm and so on and so forth. So in order to get to 9 nines, they had to have a tremendous attention to every little piece of their process, their manufacturing mechanisms, the machines they use to build the pieces that go into the aircraft, so that they were making really informed decisions about reducing error in this very specific myopic case. The primary focus is how do we do data better than we're doing today, and better meaning how can we be more thoughtful, how can we be more deliberate in how we accommodate, mitigate, or remove risk from our business.
Double tapping on your aircraft analogy, if you want to fly, you have to do all these things, right? If you want a vehicle that is going to help you to fly, you need to do that. And it sounds like data governance is a must-have. Okay, well, we data professionals really believe that. We think that, and we live by that. And my question is, if when it is not happening, why it doesn't happen? Where do you see those pitfalls? Is there a pattern there? When someone wants to do a data governance, they want to implement that, they fail.
Yeah.
Why would that happen?
Why does so two things. You can either fail before you even get started, right? Like you don't realize that you're failing because you're just not even aware yet. And then and honestly, in some cases, somebody that doesn't realize that they're struggling or failing to perform the right maturity steps or pursuit of better data governance may not realize that that's they have no concept that that's part of the reason why they need to get better. Another reason why sometimes organizations might struggle or outright fail in pursuing data governance best practices is it can come from a handful of different places. My thought about this is a lot of organizations can look at data governance as a cost, as a limiting factor to being successful. And if you're thinking that way, you're immediately going to be unsuccessful. And a lot of times the reason they feel that way, the reason there's a perception of that, is it's tied to a perception of data as exhaust, data as not a value, not an asset to the organization. Like they understand intrinsically, like I need some data in order to tell like what's happened, but they don't really understand. They don't really appreciate if I don't treat this with the same care and the same attention that I do the widget we're creating or the service we're providing and so on and so forth, I'm immediately going to reduce the value in the organization, and as a result reduce my own interpretation and prioritization of handling that product, the product being data. And I think that's very common, right? Another thing that causes organizations to fail, data governance, again, air quoting here, is financial institutions have a lot of data governance. Health insurance companies have a lot of data governance. It's a given. Like, I've got to have it. And a lot of the times what they're doing is entirely CYA. So entirely keep us from getting sued. It's not actually because I care. It's not actually because it's super important. Sometimes it is. I don't mean to paint all financial institutions and all insurance companies this way, because I don't think it is true. But I think there is a population of this group that's like, well, there are laws that govern our business, and we need to make sure we're demonstrating we're doing a good job by those laws, and that is the extent to which I care. And that's not good enough either. Like, because someone said so is never a good enough reason for someone to be successful doing the thing they want, like that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's not getting that first-class citizen treatment, and it's not getting the priority, and essentially it almost impacts the return that data can have itself, because you're not, investing on it, and so it minimizes. So it's almost like a vicious cycle that it's hard to get out of.
Absolutely. And you have to treat the data not as exhaust, but as a data asset for the organization to really pursue data governance in a thoughtful, methodical, effective way. If you don't, then you're doing it because someone said so. And so you'll do a fine job with the things that someone said you had to do, but you're really not doing data governance. You're doing, I need to keep myself out of trouble kind of work.
Yeah. I usually see data governance more related with, say, more mature data organizations. Like, it's almost like organizations reach a level where you have the basics, pipelines are running, there's some insights, and then it's almost like an afterthought. When would you say is the correct moment to start thinking about it and standing up a data governance team or practice or take care about it?
Yeah, I think it depends on the type of business you're pursuing. To really pursue what data governance needs, what people are really interested in, and really go running off to the races, you need to have a really good understanding of what the priorities of the business need to be or are. One of the benefits of data governance, an effective data governance organization, is one that can marry the scope of risk for the organization with the capacities or interests or abilities of said organization to mitigate or manage those risks. And in order to do that effectively, in order to really understand that, it means that you've got to be able to engage across a huge group of people. So you can, in some cases, have a culture at an organization, at a company, be very top-down, directorial. You've got to do it this way. We're going to be super tight, very specific about and dogmatic about our processes and our procedures, and be very, another word for it is draconian. You will do this or you will be in trouble. And you can be effective at rolling out a data governance organization in that space.
Yeah. Good. I just want to summarize what I heard so far in this 15, 20 minutes of short introduction to data governance. What I heard, Will, you were talking about the history of data governance based on for the last 15 years, maybe. There are two aspects. The perception of the value of the data has changed. I think that happened thanks to data science, machine learning, all these. The data started to take more important role when we are making the decisions, right? So people started to accept that and started to rely on data more often than before. And also you mentioned when you treat data as an asset, like data is a product, just like something in front, like widgets and a piece of software that interact with your customers. I think it helps in two ways. One, you are forcefully encouraged to manage that product, the data. So it keeps you between the lines. It keeps you on the trajectory where you want to go. And the second is it is easier to govern that when it is defined border, even though you are going to incrementally improve that, you are going to make it bigger, but it is easier to manage. In another way, it is easier to govern. But at that point, I have a question. So nobody wants to do data governance for the sake of data governance. Okay. What is the main purpose? Like, imagine I have no idea. I never heard about what data governance is. I still rely on data. I have my data assets, products. I have data product managers and so on and so forth. And at some point, I say, oh my God, something is missing. And the answer is data governance. What is the question?
I think for me, from what I've found, it typically when you're talking to like executives, when you're talking about people who are trying to make important decisions for a business, it really comes down to, I can trust this output to make a risky decision. It's mitigated the other risks that I have that exist in my world, and it allows me to say, yep, I believe my analysts, I believe my scientists, I believe the model, I believe whatever it is, because it inherently it improves my own trust, my own confidence that what they're recommending or what they're reporting is reflective of reality.
That's awesome.
Isn't that what quality gives you? Like if you have a good quality practice and high reliability in your data, then you can trust it. So how does governance complement that?
I think you also said that, like, in the beginning, very beginning, you said people think that compliance is the entire data governance, and compliance is just one pillar of it, saying that, hey, my data, the report I'm generating is reliable, it is trustworthy, you can go and use it, and it happens thanks to data governance. But there are more than compliance, and I think this is what Oksana is bringing. It has to be high quality as well. What
Yeah.
else out there?
So I think there's, again, if you use the organizational best practices or organizational terminology that the data management book of knowledge outlines, right? Data governance it encompasses a tremendous amount of disciplines and practices. Data quality being one of them, data architecture being another one, observability and reliability being other pieces of the apparatus. But I think in practice, a lot of these things behave synonymously. So, for instance, to get very specific about, like, in response to your question, Oksana, in order to trust the output that my analysts are providing, right? They're saying, this is where the market is. In order to really have high confidence in that, I obviously need to have high confidence that the data is accurate, that there's an assurance of accuracy in the outputs that they're providing. That assurance comes from the quality of the data, to be on time, complete. There's a whole bunch of metrics that people typically, and again, the data management book of knowledge outlines many, many, many different facets of data quality and attributes of data quality, measurement apparatuses, best practices, and so on and so forth. Data governance, typically, when we're talking about improving trust or improving confidence in data, it also comes with a certain amount of intrinsic literacy and interpretability. And that typically isn't part of a data quality pipeline. It's part of it's an addendum to it that adds human knowledge, institutional information, consistency, corporate alignment, source integration, saying that, look, we're going to be like, when we report these numbers, they will always come from this source, and they will always be calculated this way. And that's different than data quality per se. It's dependent on data quality. That whole pipeline needs to be highly observed. It needs to be accurate. It needs to be timely. It needs to be so on and so forth. But it also needs to be highly interpretable. And there needs to be almost no vagueness or ambiguity about why we calculate things the way we calculate them, why we mix things, why we filter things out, and so on and so forth. That part of it, and making sure that we have that understandability. I call it literacy just for brevity's sake, but so that we have that literacy, that's part of the data governance apparatus as well.
Yeah.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. I'm taking visionary will into a practitioner will in the data governance part. I feel like so far we made a good definition what data governance is, why do you need it. That's great. But let's say now we are just getting our hands dirty. How are we going to implement it? Where would you start? What do you need?
What does it look like?
Yeah. Let's be honest. To make that practically appropriate and work for the organization that I'm working for or working with or the group, whatever it is, I've got to customize the best practice to the reality of our circumstance. In my view, and from my experience, especially in the tech space, this centers around a sense of collaboration. Because at the end of the day, one of the benefits that I bring to organization as a data governance professional is it's like an internal consultant, a trusted advisor who has no skin in the game about like the output that you're pursuing, but does care about making sure that that's the best it possibly can be without getting my hands dirty on the keyboard and building it myself. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to help understand what is it you're trying to do. Engineer so-and-so, product manager so-and-so, analyst, finance team, executive group. What is it that you want? How do you want this thing? How often do you need it? When these things happen, what's the result? How does that affect you? And by having that knowledge and by elevating the expertise that exists inside of the organization and giving those teams the space to continue innovating and really pursuing the stuff that they're awesome at, it accelerates the organization at pursuing more and more of that stuff. So how it starts with and rotates around this idea that I've got to make friends and influence people without any power whatsoever, and I've got to make sure that people, like, I'm a likable person, that I'm somebody that they can trust, that I've got their best interests in mind, and that I create an environment and a culture where that's something that we share. And that's very similar to the next point I was going to make, which is you want to, as a data governance professional, create the right degree of maturity, frameworks and processes and paradigms such that it challenges the organization to do better than they're currently doing, but doesn't weigh them down with like, well, to do the best job you possibly can do, it's going to be all of this stuff. It's 9.5 years of effort, and you're just going to have to do it. And, best of luck, right? I'm going to check if you're doing your job right. And if you're not, I'm going to let your boss know, right? Like, that's the fastest way to not get anything done in this space and frankly in a lot of others. So my approach has always been, look, how do we create a framework and do so in a way that's very reflective of the current business need and the current reality of our maturity, our data maturity and data maturity best practices, and then begin to measure the effectiveness of rolling those things out. Oksana, you're familiar with, like, I like to create, if the culture is receptive to it, I like to create healthy competition amongst groups because it creates the right kind of, like, I don't know, my personal experience has been engineers and engineer adjacent teams are excited about getting like a gold star. If I can chase, like, how do I do the best I can possibly do? Well, here's this short list. Just do these 8 things. Well, I really hate number 6. All right. Help me understand. What about number 6 do you really hate and why? And that last part, the third point that I was going to make. So collaboration, process that meets people where they are, but challenges them to do better. And the third point is technology. How do I create, infuse technology that alleviates, where possible, the onerous stuff? Everything that can be automated, let's automate it. Everything that can be seamless and integrated, let's do that. Again, with the right cost benefit analysis and so on and so forth, but like, let's be very deliberate and thoughtful about if you've got a core data element that you're defining, the idea of a subscriber, and you've done a fantastic job of itemizing exactly what it is that's gone into how we've built this core data element that's now feeding the rest of our pipeline, don't under any circumstance ever redefine that the 100,000 times that it exists across our data environment. Let's just make that automatically propagate such
Right.
that anyone who interfaces with it will now know, yep, and there's a golden record and it automatically updates and there's all this magic. Yep.
Yeah, I think, and for context, I worked with Will before on the engineering side and Will on the governance side. And I think what made that successful was the receptivity of your team to iterate on the process and be flexible. Because I agree, if you come very rigid with you have to do A, B, C, D, E, then it's going to make it hard for the engineering team to cooperate and do whatever that has to be done. But what I wanted to ask you is I'm sure you've found friction from engineering teams because it's definitely something that's going to slow them down. And even though I believe I'm a believer on the long term, data governance does bring a lot of value even to the engineering team, and I can appreciate the benefits, but how have you dealt with that friction when they don't value it and maybe they don't want to put the effort to either document something or do whatever has.
Yeah. It comes from finding one person. I've yet to find an organization that doesn't have at least one person that's like, oh my gosh, you saved me so much time. There's always one person, at least, that walks away being like, I don't like doing it, but I don't ever have to answer. You said this, and I trusted you, but like I didn't really believe it. And now I've never answered another question. I just point back to the documentation. My team doesn't have to. This time savings in the operational management of ongoing assets by simply having effective documentation, as one example, um, is tremendous. It allows them to spend so much more time on stuff that's actually fun and difficult and innovative and they get excited about. Typically, it's find the one the one person that can evangelize what it is that you're going and doing, because it's a little bit easier to listen to a fellow engineer be like, okay, well, look, this sucks. No one likes doing this. But I promise you, the other thing that sucks, like constantly asking everybody, answering these questions about why I built this and why, or like, heaven forbid, I took over a pipeline that I had no knowledge of beforehand, and no one documented anything, so now I'm having to answer questions of somebody else. That's easy to do now. Like, it's so simple. I don't have to answer those questions ever again. That's huge, and it typically is the fulcrum. It's the moment that you create the culture of influencing best practices. And in the perfect environment, this also starts to influence the governance by design methodology. So if you can really encourage and incentivize, and you find that one someone who can evangelize this process, they'll incorporate it in their release process, right? They'll say, look, I won't release code. My team won't release code unless they do this work. And that creates a culture of just expectations. And it creates a culture of, it elevates that entire component of the organization. And again, it slowly changes the hearts and minds of the rest of the organization. And then it allows us space to start going and doing more. And also, like if you're talking about blue sky environments, like how far away are we from where we really need to be, such that you have a very practical list of opportunities that you can pursue. So it's like, just getting definitions in all of our databases and all of our key data elements is step one. Okay, well, how far along are we? Are we 20% of the way there? Are we 80% of the way there? Is one team doing an awesome job and everybody else is not doing an awesome job? Like, getting a measurement apparatus on top of that helps a lot too. And it's another tool and another way to influence change. Again, like that's a little bit more of the, top-down organization. I typically like to do it more grassroots, but
yeah. So apparently, this process or set of processes improves the efficiency, and the engineering work becomes less repetitive, right? And at least the communication is going to be improved. This is an internal impact. And there is an external one. Many people start, we need governance. It is because we don't want to be sued by our customers or partners or whatever. But let's say somewhere in between this external and internal stuff. Let's say a CDO is going to look at why am I going to implement this data? Well, no CDO is going to question that. They're already aware of it, right? But let's say a first-time CDO is going to implement that, and they're convinced that, oh, we need that for compliance issues. Okay, we got this. And then we are going to increase the engineering efficiencies. That's great. And as the third part, how is it going to make an impact on the business? Because the CDOs are also is responsible for the business, right? Like the revenue, profitability, or whatever you can put as a measure. How do you see the impact on the business having a data governance practices in place?
So again, depending upon the degree of maturity, there are immediate impacts and positive impacts to OpEx. But there are also some really neat ways that data governance and highly mature data organization can begin to inform CapEx. So what I mean by saying this is, in the same way that you were saying, like a lot of organizations or a lot of companies might look at data governance and say, okay, you're going to keep us from having to pay fines because we did something wrong. Cool. That's opportunity cost savings, and the efficiencies from the engineering teams and so on and so forth. We can build more stuff. Awesome. The other part of this that begins to intersect is, like I said, a certain degree of increasing confidence in internal reporting apparatuses and the data performance and so on and so forth. But along the same exact lines, having a more mature data organization allows us to make more informed decisions as a business, up and down. Say we're building an app to do something, and we need more effective measurement of app performance, behaviors on the app, conversion funnel activities, so on and so forth. The less mature we are, the less confident, at least, we can be in the outputs, like the actions we need to take to improve such and such. If our confidence is low, we can perform fewer experiments. We can perform fewer activities that evolutionarily improve the product we produce. In addition to that, it creates space for even uninformed bad actors to cause disruption inside the organization. It also makes it so that when we start spending actual funds to start, onboarding new customers or adding to our platform, we may be investing in the wrong spots. We may be pursuing the wrong type of customer. We may be pursuing the wrong types of content or the wrong investment in our environment because our confidence interval is low. So the idea is a higher degree of maturity improves the trustworthiness of the data, improves the trustworthiness and the confidence you have in the investment decisions you're making off of said data, up and down, macro, micro, and so on.
Yeah. But the ultimate goal is eventually making better informed decisions, data-driven decisions.
Yes, it's the magic intersection of art and science. Right. And if the science is bad, then I have to rely entirely on my vision, on my art. And,
that's right.
Humans are notoriously awful at predicting the future. So it would be really good to have at least an apparatus that helps us give some, conditional checks on top of that visionary. Yep.
So we want to do better informed decisions. Everybody wants to do better informed decisions, right? The challenge here is measuring the output is so hard of better informed decisions because you cannot give the credit a certain decision how much money you made thanks to that decision. But the easy part is measuring the cost of that, right? Well, the cost of not doing it is still very hard, which is tremendous, actually, even though many of us don't acknowledge that. Implementing is still high cost. And at that point, I'm going to ask you, we are on the last quarter, right? We would like to help our audience to plan their budgets in 2025. What should they do? Where can they join this journey? How much data governance or any other good data practices they can implement? What to do today so that they can get better prepared in 2025 with the coming all these new trends around the world.
Yeah. Well, I think I would be remiss if I didn't say something about generative AI in the response to that. But I will start with something else. I think that as an organization, actually, as data becomes more central to many more organizations and types of organizations around the world, these practices that we've been talking about for almost the last hour have become more and more important. How do we do this right? How do we do this well? What does well mean for us? And I think that it's imperative that an organization begins to answer some of those questions for themselves and then starts to take a very critical and thoughtful look at the options that exist out in the wilderness, right? So a lot of teams, a lot of companies might think, well, I can just stand this up myself and we'll just build our own version of this. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And the benefit to having a vendor do some of this stuff is in many cases, they've cut their teeth on this before and they're specializing and so on and so forth. So my recommendation, we work with data catalog apparatuses, data quality apparatuses, observability apparatuses, all this stuff. And it's critical to identify as an organization, what are our biggest opportunity spaces in the realm of data governance? If it's observability, what are the best tools for this? If it's data quality, what do I mean when I say data quality? Because again, unpacking that is difficult and typically personal, like to the organization. So those are critical. And then separate to that, the other thing that I think is very important to begin to unpack and understand is how should or could I, as a chief data officer or a data professional, begin to leverage the very real tools of generative AI, both in vendor solutions and myself and whatever else, in informing those decisions? Because the reality is a huge amount of what we face as data professionals is data is too big for one person or one team or 400 people working together to really understand. And so it's going to require automation to help us. And a lot of really cool things are out there that gives us the ability to interface and challenge or tackle some of the challenges that exist around data quality, data operations, data discovery, literacy, dovetailing each of those things into effective action and resolving the needs of our organization is what we as data professionals, I think, it behooves us to pursue. So that's at high level what I would describe.
Cool. Yeah. All right, cool. Thank you so much, Will. That was really enlightening. Awesome.
Thanks, Will. Amazing time. Great talking to you.
Yeah, it was great talking to you guys as well. I'm very happy to be here, and I thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you liked today's episode, remember to share and subscribe. And if you want to learn more about what we're doing at Constellation, visit us at constellationdata.com.